The house on Cheongdam Hill did not allow mistakes. This was not a rule that had been written anywhere. It did not appear in the employment contract that Audrey Donald had signed at the Domestic Placement Agency on a Wednesday morning in April, alongside the non-disclosure agreement and the schedule of duties and the single-page document that described the property at 14 Cheongdam Hill as a private residence requiring full household management in the specific, sanitized vocabulary of paperwork that has been designed to describe one thing while declining to describe the thing beneath it. The rule existed the way certain rules exist in certain households, not stated, fully understood, enforced through the quality of the silence that followed any deviation from the expected standard. Audrey had worked in 6 households before this one, and she had learned to read the rules that weren't written, and she had read this one correctly within the first 48 hours of her employment. She read it in the way the other staff moved through the house, precisely, without surplus motion, with the specific, practiced invisibility of people who had understood that their function in this space was maintenance rather than presence. She read it in the way the household manager, a woman named Binna, conducted the morning briefings, concise, sequential, with the compressed efficiency of someone for whom verbal economy was both professional standard and personal survival skill. She read it in the way the security personnel, who were stationed at the gate and at 2 interior positions she had identified in the first week, held themselves, alert without performing alertness, present without occupying the space that their presence might have claimed. She read it most clearly in what she was told about the man who owned the house. She was told very little. This was itself the most specific information available. His name was Suk-jun. He was 43. He was the principal of a commercial conglomerate with operations across South Korea, Japan, and the American Southeast. He was in residence approximately 18 days per month and traveled for the remainder. He required the house to function at a standard that Binna described, without elaboration, as exacting. He did not interact with household staff beyond what the management of the household required. He did not entertain frequently, and when he entertained, the household was to operate at the highest available standard without any member of the staff becoming a notable presence in the event. He was not described as unkind. He was not described as kind. He was described in the vocabulary of a man whose existence in this house was structural rather than domestic, a person around whom the house organized itself rather than a person who lived in it. Audrey accepted this framing. She had worked in houses before where the person at the center was an organizing principle rather than a human being in the ordinary sense, and she knew how to be excellent at her function while maintaining the specific, professional invisibility that such houses required. What she had not accounted for, what the employment contract and the non-disclosure agreement and the single-page property description had not accounted for, was the Tuesday morning in her 3rd week when she arrived at the 2nd floor study to complete the morning clean and found Suk-jun sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. Not working. Not managing the house structurally. Sitting at his desk at 7:15 in the morning with his head in his hands in the specific, defeated posture of a man who has been awake for a very long time and has arrived at a point that the careful management of his public self was not able to prevent. He did not know she was there for the first 30 seconds. She knew this because his posture did not change, and Suk-jun, who registered everything, did not register her until she moved. In those 30 seconds, Audrey Donald saw the man underneath the organizing principle, and the man underneath was tired. Not the ordinary tired of travel and professional obligation, the deep, structural tired of someone who has been carrying things without acknowledgement for long enough that carrying has become the primary occupation. She moved to leave. He registered the movement. He looked up. Their eyes met across the 2nd floor study of the house on Cheongdam Hill, in the 7:15 light of a Tuesday morning in April, and something happened in the quality of the room that neither of them had been expecting and both of them would spend the following months trying to correctly identify. He said, "You don't have to go." She stayed. That was the beginning of everything that came after. A note before we proceed. This narrator came to this story through Audrey Donald, who tells it with the precision of a woman who has processed every part of it and arrived at the version she considers accurate. What follows is assembled from that account, and from what can be confirmed from the events themselves. The house on Cheongdam Hill is real. The Tuesday morning happened. What the family declared is the part that required 8 chapters to contain. Subscribe before this story moves one sentence further. Because what Suk-jun says to Audrey the morning he finds her standing in his study, and what he asks her not to do, is the sentence that starts everything. And you need to be here when it arrives. Audrey Donald had come to Seoul the way people come to the places that change them, not looking for the change, but moving towards something specific enough to justify the distance. She had grown up in Savannah, Georgia, the eldest daughter of Celestine and Horace Donald, a registered nurse and a high school history teacher who had built, in the specific, resilient way of people who understood that what they were building was always larger than themselves, a household that produced 2 daughters and 1 son who each carried, in different configurations, the same foundational understanding, that excellence was not an aspiration but a discipline, and that the world's reluctance to accommodate you was a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be accepted. Audrey had studied hospitality management at Savannah State, had worked in hotel management for 4 years, and had transitioned into private household coordination through a connection that had led to her first placement at 26 with an Atlanta family whose household needs had been, by any standard, complicated, in which she had managed with the focused thoroughness that had become her professional signature. She had taken the Seoul placement for 3 reasons. The first was professional, the compensation was exceptional, and the placement agency had described the position as the kind that made careers rather than simply filling them. The second was personal. She had been in Atlanta for 4 years and had begun to understand that the version of herself that Atlanta had produced was a fully realized version of the version she had arrived as, and that the next version required a different kind of pressure. The third reason she did not articulate easily but understood clearly. She needed to be somewhere that had nothing to do with anyone who had known the previous version of her. She was 29 when she arrived at 14 Cheongdam Hill with a single large suitcase, a professional reputation that preceded her through the agency's description, and the specific, focused readiness of a woman who has decided she is available for whatever the new place requires. She was not available for what the new place actually required. But then, no one is for the things that actually change them. Suk-jun's family, which was, in the specific vocabulary of the conglomerate and everything that ran beneath it, something considerably larger than a family in the ordinary sense, had a name. The Hwangjeon Network, named for the founding families whose consolidation 3 generations ago had produced the organization that Suk-jun now led, was one of the oldest and most structured private networks in the Korean peninsula. Not exclusively criminal. The word criminal was insufficient for what the Hwangjeon Network was, in the same way that a word describing the surface of a body of water is insufficient for describing the body of water. It had legitimate operations of genuine scale, the conglomerate being the most visible. It had operations that existed in the spaces where the legitimate and its adjacencies overlapped. And it had, in the specific category of its most protected operations, things that the legitimate vocabulary could not contain. Suk-jun had led the network for 9 years, since the death of his father Hwang Ji-tak, who had handed it to him in the specific, uncompromising manner of men who build things and hand them to their sons without asking whether the son has chosen to receive them. He had been a capable leader, methodical, precise, with the particular, patient authority of someone who understood that power maintained quietly was more durable than power performed loudly. He had not been a happy one. But happiness was not the metric the Hwangjeon Network applied to its principle, and Suk-jun had not, for 9 years, applied it to himself. The family, the inner circle, the people who held the operational structure of the network in their specific portions, included his mother, Hwang Se-yeon, who was 71 and whose opinion of anything her son did or did not do was delivered in the specific, absolute vocabulary of a woman who had been the de facto power behind her husband's leadership for 30 years and considered the transition to her son's leadership a lateral rather than a hierarchical move. It included his eldest uncle, Hwang Dae-suk, who was 67 and whose function in the network was the management of the political and legal adjacencies that the conglomerate required. It included a cousin, John Rae-won, who was 38 and who had been, since Suk-jun's assumption of leadership, the most vocal internal voice for the kind of expansion that Suk-jun had been systematically and patiently declining. And it included the woman who had been proposed as Suk-jun's intended partner for 6 years, Baek Seon-hwa, the daughter of a Busan shipping family whose consolidation with the Hwangjeon network had been discussed at the level of the senior members as a strategic alignment so obvious that only Suk-jun's consistent, unspoken refusal to formalize it had prevented it from being presented as concluded. These were the people who declared war when Suk-jun fell in love with his maid. This is where the story begins. The Tuesday in the third week was not the beginning of what followed. It was, in retrospect, the moment before the beginning. The specific, unplanned opening of a door that had been closed not through intention, but through the ordinary management of two people in the same house who had been organizing their proximity around the rules that weren't written. Audrey had come to the study at 7:15 because the study was on the Tuesday morning rotation, and because Audrey, whose professional standard was the kind that did not adjust based on whether the occupant of a room was present, had arrived at her schedule with the same deliberate thoroughness she brought to everything. She had not known he was there. The household calendar, which Binna updated with the precision of a military logistics officer, had shown him in transit until Thursday. He had come back early. He had come back, she would understand later, from things he eventually told her, from a meeting in Busan that had required him to sit in a room with Baek Seon-hwa's father and listen to a proposal that had been framed, for the 14th time in 6 years, as an inevitability that only required Suk-jun's formal confirmation. He had left the meeting, driven to the airport, and come home. He had been in the study since 4 a.m. with his head in his hands, which was not the posture of a man who had made a decision, but the posture of a man who had been carrying the weight of one long enough that the carrying had become everything. After he said, "You don't have to go," and she stayed, he did not immediately speak. He looked at her with the specific, slightly arrested quality of a man who has been unexpectedly witnessed and is deciding how to hold the fact of the witnessing. She stood at the appropriate professional distance and waited, because waiting was the correct response to a situation that was above the written rules, and she trusted her instinct for the unwritten ones. "You're Audrey," he said. "Yes," she said. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said. 3 weeks and 2 days, she said. Something crossed his face. "Binna says you're the best housekeeper she's managed in 11 years, he said. "That's generous of Binna," she said. He looked at her. The look had the quality of someone who was doing something they did not normally do, which was to see the person in front of them rather than their function. "What time do you start?" he said. 6:30, she said. "You've been here since 6:30, and it's now." He checked the clock on the desk. 7:15. "I work the ground floor first," she said. "The study is on the second floor, first room." He nodded. The nod of someone organizing information that had previously been managed as background. "Do you want coffee?" he said. She held the question for a moment. In 6 households, she had never been asked this question by the person at the center of the household. She had been offered coffee by them on occasion, which was different. Offered meant the offering, while asked meant the asking cared about her answer. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He got up. She registered this as notable, that he went to the small credenza in the study rather than calling down to the kitchen, that he made the coffee himself in the focused, practiced way of a man who had learned to do it because he preferred it done a specific way rather than because there was no one to do it for him. He made 2 cups. He brought them to the desk. He indicated the chair across from him. She sat in the employer's chair, in the employer's study, at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, which was, by every written and unwritten rule of the house on Cheongdam Hill, not the correct configuration. She sat anyway. "How did you end up in Seoul?" he said. She told him the 3 reasons. Not the full version, the accurate outline, at the level of honesty appropriate to a 7:15 Tuesday coffee in a room that had no frame for what it currently contained. He listened with the full, unhurried attention of someone who had decided the thing being said was worth every word of it. She noticed this. It was not ordinary attention. It was the complete kind, the kind that does not distribute itself between listening and processing and planning the response. He was simply present with what she was saying. "What is the next version?" he said, when she described needing to become the next version of herself. She looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the point." He held her gaze. Something moved in his expression, not the managed version of his face, which she had been observing from the appropriate distances for 3 weeks, and which had the quality of something that had been maintained at significant effort. The thing underneath. "I find that," he said, "more courageous than most things I've encountered." She thought about a man who sat in a study at 4 a.m. with his head in his hands, and came back early from a meeting rather than staying to answer. "What would the courageous version of your situation look like?" she said. He went very still. Not with offense, with the specific, arrested quality of a man who has been asked a question that no one in his world had thought to ask, because the people in his world had organized themselves around the assumption that his situation was determined and required management rather than examination. "I don't know," he said, in the same tone she had used. The tone of someone saying the honest thing rather than the prepared thing. "Then that," she said, "is the point." She finished her coffee. She thanked him. She stood up. She went back to the study's morning clean with the focused, professional attention that had made her Binna's best in 11 years. He watched her work for a moment. Then he opened his laptop and returned to his correspondence. But the room was different. They were both aware of it. The difference did not have a name yet. It would take several months to name it, and the naming would cost them both more than either was prepared for on that Tuesday morning. But Tuesday morning was where it started. Houses know things before the people in them do. This is not mysticism. It is the accumulated observation of the people who manage houses, who see the patterns that the people at the center of houses produce without being aware they are producing them, and who understand, from the patterns, what is happening before the people in the patterns have acknowledged it. Binna was the first to know. She was not the kind of woman who commented on what she knew. She had managed the house on Cheongdam Hill for 11 years, and in those 11 years, she had seen the things that happened in the proximity of a man like Suk-jun, the women who were brought into the house's social orbit by the network's social requirements, the advisor women and the business connection women, and the carefully vetted women of the kind that Baek Sianhwa represented, whose presence in the house was always provisional and always purposeful. She had watched all of them in the same way she watched everything, with the methodical, unsentimentality of a woman who had decided that her function was to manage the house, and that managing the house required seeing everything clearly without producing commentary on any of it. What she saw, beginning in the 4th week of Audrey's employment, was a series of small, specific deviations from the house's established patterns. Suk-jun began taking his morning coffee in the study rather than the breakfast room. This was not remarkable in itself. He worked in the study, and the coffee followed the work. What was notable was the timing, which shifted from the 8:30 delivery by the kitchen staff to a self-prepared 7:15 activity that coincided with the consistency of a pattern rather than the randomness of coincidence, with Audrey's study cleaning rotation. He began coming home on the dates the household calendar had marked as transit rather than residence. Not frequently, twice in the first month, 3 times in the second. Each time without announcement, which was his prerogative. Each time, Binna noted, on days when Audrey's schedule had her in the upper floors of the house during the morning hours. He began stopping in rooms that he was passing through. This was the most telling pattern because Suk-jun moved through the house with the focused, purposeful directness of a man who did not deviate from his route. He did not linger. He did not stop to look at things. The house was managed at his standard, and he did not audit its management because it did not require auditing. He started stopping at the threshold of the east sitting room when Audrey was managing the floral arrangements, at the kitchen doorway when she was reviewing the weekly provisions with the cook, at the second floor landing on a morning when she was bringing linens up from the service corridor, stopping for the specific, brief duration of a man who is not ready to acknowledge what is drawing him to the stopping, but who is not yet willing to walk past it. Audrey knew. She had the specific, professional awareness of someone who had been managing herself in other people's spaces for 7 years, and who understood when the space had changed around her. She did not comment on what she knew. She did not alter her professional conduct. She continued to be excellent at her function and to maintain the invisibility that the house required of its staff, and she managed the deviations in the pattern with the focused, Internal precision of a woman who was paying very close attention while appearing to pay attention only to the linens and the floral arrangements and the weekly provisions. She talked about it with Waverly, not Waverly, who was her best friend from Savannah and whose name she used because it was the name she used in her own mind for the mental interlocutor she produced when she was working through something significant. The actual version of this conversation happened with a woman named Sephora, who was the housekeeper at the neighboring property and who had become, in the gradual way of proximity and shared professional experience, the closest thing Audrey had to a friend in soul. She told Sephora, on a Sunday afternoon in a cafe 2 streets from Cheongdam Hill, that something was happening in the house that she was not certain how to manage. Sephora, who had been in Korean household service for 12 years, and who had the specific, unillusioned pragmatism of a woman who has seen many things happen in many houses, listened with full attention and said, "What kind of something?" Audrey described it. The patterns. The stopping. The morning coffees. Sephora looked at her for a long moment. "You know what kind of something?" she said. "I know what it looks like," Audrey said. "I don't know if it's what it looks like." "In my experience," Sephora said, "men like Suk-jun are not performing when they stop in doorways. They are not strategic about the small things. The large things, yes. The doorways, no." Audrey held her coffee. "What are you going to do?" Sephora said. "My job," Audrey said. "Correctly. That is the only available answer. And if he says something, then I'll answer correctly," Audrey said. "And after that, I'll figure out what correctly means in that specific situation." Sephora looked at her with the expression of a woman who understood that correctly was doing a great deal of work in that sentence and who respected the working of it. "He has a family," Sephora said. "I know," Audrey said. "Not the kind of family that." "I know what kind of family," Audrey said. "I read the documents before I sign them. I understand the house I am in." Sephora was quiet. "I am not planning anything," Audrey said. "I am managing something I did not plan. There is a difference." "Yes," Sephora said. "The difference is who it happens to. And I think it is happening to both of you." Audrey went home. She went back to the house on Cheongdam Hill, and she managed the evening's work with the focused, professional clarity that she always managed everything with. And she stood in the second-floor study at the end of the day, the room that had started everything. And she looked at the desk where he had made 2 coffees on a Tuesday morning, and she thought about a man who had been asked what the courageous version of his situation looked like, and had gone still. She thought about it for a long time. Then she went home to her staff quarters, and she did not think about it anymore, which required considerably more effort than thinking about it would have. Bina sees the pattern. Sephora says the difference is who it happens to. Subscribe, because what Suk-jun does the first time he says something that is not about the house is the moment this story becomes irreversible, and it happens in a room that neither of them planned. It was the 4th month before he said the honest thing. The 4 months had been the accumulation of the patterns Bina had cataloged, the morning coffees, the doorway stops, the early returns from transit, plus the additional, quieter accumulation of conversations that were not entirely about the house. Not frequently. Not in the performed, deliberate manner of a man pursuing something. In the natural, incremental way of 2 people who have been given the proximity of a shared space and who find, over time, that the shared space has produced a kind of knowing that neither of them had to choose. She knew he was meticulous to the point that the precision was not professional habit, but temperamental necessity. He knew she was in the habit of reading at the end of her shift, sitting in the small garden at the side of the house for 20 minutes with a book that she held in the specific, complete way of someone who was actually inside what they were reading rather than performing the reading of it. He knew she had a sister in Savannah named Rosamond who called on Sunday evenings, and whose calls Audrey answered in the staff quarters with a specific, warm, fully present voice that was different from her professional voice in the way that the true version of a person is always different from the managed one. She knew he played the piano in the music room on the evenings he did not have operational obligations. Not well, not badly, in the specific, focused manner of a man who has decided that proficiency is not the point and the point is the thing the playing does that nothing else does. She knew he was lonely in a way that was not about the absence of people. His world was full of people. The network, the conglomerate, the household, the advisors who moved through Cheongdam Hill with the compressed efficiency of the professional inner circle. The loneliness was the specific kind produced by being surrounded by people who needed things from you that had nothing to do with who you actually were, and who had organized their relationship to you around those needs so completely that the actual you had become, over years, the least visible person in the room. He knew she understood this. Not because she had said it, because she never managed the proximity into the performance of understanding. She simply understood, in the way that came from paying attention rather than from performing attention, and the understanding arrived in the room with her and created the specific, compound quality that had started on Tuesday morning and had been building ever since. The first honest thing happened on a Friday evening in the 8th week. Not in the study. In the garden, which was the side garden where Audrey read at the end of her shift and which Suk-Jun had no operational reason to pass through on a Friday evening. He passed through it. He stopped at the appropriate distance from her chair in the specific, contained way he had been stopping in doorways for 4 weeks, and he looked at the book in her hands with the expression of a man who has been practicing a sentence and has decided to say the honest version instead. "What are you reading?" he said. She showed him. It was a collection of essays by a Korean-American writer. She had started reading Korean authors in her second month in Seoul, with the focused, deliberate approach she brought to any new context, understanding that knowing the literature was part of knowing the place. He looked at the cover. Something moved in his expression. "She writes about the distance between what is expected of you and what you actually are," he said. "Yes," Audrey said. "Do you find that useful?" he said. Specifically. She held his gaze. The question had the specific weight of something that was not about the book. "I find it honest," she said. "Which is more useful than useful." He stood in the garden for a moment. He looked at the book. He looked at her. "May I sit?" he said. She indicated the other garden chair. He sat. He looked at the garden with the expression she had first seen in the study. Not the managing version, the other one. "I've been in rooms all week," he said, "where everyone in the room knew exactly what was expected of them and performed it perfectly." He paused. "I find I am increasingly unable to tell the difference between those rooms and rooms where what is expected and what is true might be the same thing." "What would be different about a room where they were the same thing?" she said. He thought about this. "I would not be performing," he said. "I would simply be present." She looked at him. "Are you performing now?" A pause. The honest sentence pause she had learned to read. "No," he said. "That's the first thing I've said in 4 days that isn't a performance." She held this. She thought about the professional invisibility and the written rules and the unwritten rules and the 7 years of managing herself in other people's spaces and the thing that Sephora had said about the difference being who it happens to. She thought about all of it clearly, without the management that might have produced a different sentence. "I'm not either," she said. He looked at her. "Performing," she said. "I haven't been, not in this garden, since you started stopping in doorways." The silence that followed was not the silence of the house's managed efficiency. It was a different kind. The silence of two people who have just acknowledged something that has been true for longer than the acknowledging and who are now sitting in the full, complicated weight of what the acknowledgement means. "Audrey," he said. "Suk-Jun," she said. "I don't know what to do with this," he said. "I know," she said. "I don't either. But I don't want to stop it," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The garden was very still. "Neither do I," she said. Which was the most honest thing she had said in the 4 months and the most consequential, and both of them understood this, and neither of them looked away. Binna did not tell the family. This is a distinction that matters enormously and that Audrey would understand fully only in retrospect, when the sequence of events had been assembled and the question of how the family came to know had been answered. What happened was this. John Ray I, the cousin who had been the most vocal internal voice for expansion, came to Cheongdam Hill on an unannounced visit in the 6th month. This was not unusual. The inner circle moved through the house with the understood access of people who considered it a network property as much as a personal residence. What was unusual was the time, a Wednesday morning at 8:15, which put him in the house during Audrey's schedule, and in the specific, coincidental configuration of the house's flow that day, in the upstairs corridor outside the music room, when Sukjun was playing piano and Audrey was standing at the doorway listening. She had not been asked to stand there. She had been passing the corridor with a tray of morning arrangements and had heard the playing and had stopped in the specific, full-attention way she listened to music, and she had been standing at the doorway for approximately 4 minutes when she heard it. Not the music, which she had heard before, but the small, barely audible sound of Sukjun's playing changing quality when it changed from solitary to witnessed. It became different when someone was listening. She had been standing in doorways and noticing it for 3 months, which was itself a form of knowing. John Ray-1 came around the corridor corner at the 4-minute mark. He stopped. He saw Audrey at the doorway. He looked at her expression, the full, unguarded quality of someone who is listening completely, without the professional management, and he looked at the music room door, and he stood there for a moment with the specific, calculating stillness of a man who has gathered information he did not come for and is deciding what it is worth. He did not speak to Audrey. He turned and went downstairs. He was in the house for 2 hours, with Sukjun, in the east sitting room with the door closed. Audrey managed the house with the focused, professional attention of someone who was performing her function correctly while being fully aware that something in the texture of the day had changed. Sukjun came to find her at noon. He found her in the garden. Their garden. She had come to think of it, though she had not permitted herself to examine the possessive, with the compressed, controlled expression of a man who has received information about what someone else has seen and is managing the implications. Ray-1 saw you, he said. I know, she said. At the music room. Yes. He looked at her. He will have told someone by now, he said. Who does he tell? She said. Sukjun was quiet for a moment. My mother, he said. And Daesuk. He paused. And Baek Sianhwa's family, eventually, because Ray-1 has been managing communications with them for the last year without my authorization, which is a separate problem I have been managing at its own pace. She held this. What does that mean for, she stopped. For what? She was not certain she was ready to name. For us, he said, saying the word she had stopped at. Simply, without the performance of casualness that might have softened it. She looked at him. I want to be clear about something, he said. Before anything else happens, I want you to understand that what Ray-1 saw in that corridor is something I am not going to characterize as innocent proximity, because it is not. And I am not going to allow what comes next, whatever comes next, to redefine it into something more manageable. What is it? She said. The same question she had asked in the garden. What is it? He looked at her with the full, direct quality that she had first seen in the study and had been watching develop into itself for 6 months. The most important thing in my life, he said, that I did not plan and did not manage and did not produce through any strategy, which means it is the only thing I have, currently, that belongs to me rather than to the network. She sat with this for a very long time. Then she said, that's the clearest sentence you've said to me. I've had 6 months of practice, he said. What comes next? She said. He was quiet. The specific, honest quiet of a man who knows the answer and is not yet at peace with it. My mother calls, he said. Tonight or tomorrow. Daesuk follows. Ray-1 positions himself as the reasonable voice of the structure. He paused. And Baek Sianhwa's father will request a meeting within the week. And what do you do? She said. I do what I have not done for 9 years, he said. I answer the question of what I want rather than what the network requires. She looked at him across the garden chair. She thought about the Tuesday morning study and the doorway stops, and the piano playing, and the honest thing in the garden, and the hand she had not taken, and the word us that he had supplied when she couldn't. Are you certain? She said. No, he said. I am certain of you. The rest I am working toward. She nodded once. The nod of a woman who has received an honest answer and accepts it as the full inventory of the truth available. Then work toward it, she said. John Ray-1 saw the doorway. Sukjun told Audrey what it meant. The mother calls tonight or tomorrow. Subscribe, because what Hwang Soo-yeon says when she arrives at Cheongdam Hill unannounced is the most precise delivery of family warfare this story produces, and it arrives through the front door like she owns it, because she believes she does. Hwang Soo-yeon did not call. She arrived at 9:15 on a Thursday morning, not unannounced in the sense of unexpected, because Sukjun had understood she was coming since Ray-1 left on Wednesday, but unannounced in the operational sense of a woman who does not request admission to a house her family built and whose entire professional philosophy could be distilled to the principle that the people who own things do not ask permission to enter them. She came in a car with 2 of her personal staff, which was her traveling configuration for visits she considered significant, and she arrived in the house with the specific, total authority of someone who had been the center of this network's social structure for 40 years and who communicated through her very bearing that the current occupant of the house was its principal by her endorsement rather than by independent claim. Binna received her at the door. Binna was the only person in the house at the staff level who was fully equipped for Huang Suyun, which meant that Binna managed the morning's operational flow around the arrival with the compressed efficiency of someone who had done this before and understood that managing it correctly required every available unit of competence. Audrey was on the ground floor when the car arrived. She was managing the East sitting room's morning arrangements with the focused, professional attention she always brought to it, and she became aware of the arrival through the small, specific reorganization of the house's ambient sound that happened when something significant entered it. She had been told, not by Suk-jun, by the quality of his manner that morning, which had the compressed, controlled quality she had come to recognize as the register of a man preparing for something he had already decided how to handle and was managing the waiting. He had said, at 7:15 over coffee in the study, their morning coffee, which had become fixed in the 4 months since the Tuesday morning, and which she had not analyzed because analyzing it would have required deciding what it was, and she had been waiting for him to decide first. She will come today. I know, she had said. She will want to speak with you, he said. What do you want me to say to her? He had looked at her with the full attention. The truth, he said. She has been dealing and managed information for 40 years, and she recognizes the real version of things faster than anyone I've met. Don't manage it. What is the truth, she said. He was quiet for a moment. That what exists between us is real and is not a performance, and is not a temporary deviation from the household structure, and is not something I am going to characterize as something smaller than it is to make it easier for anyone to accept. She had held this. That is a significant statement, she said. It is, he said. And it is what I want you to understand I have decided before she arrives. So that when she speaks to you, you know that what you say is supported. She had thought about that sentence, what you say is supported, for the 3 hours between coffee and the arrival of the car, and she had understood that it was the specific, deliberate kind of sentence that a man produces when he wants to communicate that the person he is speaking to is not alone in the room that is coming. Huang Suyun requested Suk-jun in the formal sitting room at the front of the house. The formal sitting room was the network's room, the room where official conversations happened, where the register was institutional rather than personal. Choosing it was itself a communication. Audrey continued managing the house. She managed the East sitting room. She managed the morning provision review with the cook. She did all of it with the focused, professional attention that had made her Binna's best in 11 years. And she was in the second-floor corridor with the linen cart when Binna appeared at the end of it and said, in the specific, compressed neutral of a woman who was conveying information without commentary, Madam wishes to speak with you. Formal sitting room. Audrey set down the linens. She looked at Binna. Binna looked at her with the 11 years of seeing everything clearly without commenting on any of it, and said, she is not a woman who is stopped by the performance of strength. She is stopped by the real article. Then Binna went back to her form management. Audrey went to the formal sitting room. Huang Siyun was seated at the head of the sitting room's central arrangement, the chair that was the functional equivalent of a throne in this room's particular geography, the chair from which the network's significant conversations had been held for 40 years. She was 71, and she occupied 71 in the way of women who have spent their lives being the most significant person in rooms, and who wear their age as additional authority rather than diminishment. She was dressed with the precise, intentional formality of someone who had arrived at a house to conduct a specific kind of business and wanted the business to know it. She looked at Audrey as she entered. The full, complete, unmanaged assessment of a woman who had been reading people in rooms for 40 years. Audrey did not manage her expression. She was too tired and too certain about what she was standing in to manage it. You are Audrey Donald, Soo-Yun said. Not a question, an identification. Yes, Audrey said. Sit down, Soo-Yun said. She sat. My son, Soo-Yun said, has not looked at a woman the way he looks at you in 11 years. Not since before his father died and the network became his. She paused. That fact is not a small thing. Audrey said nothing. I am not here to threaten you, Soo-Yun said. I want to be clear about that before we proceed, because the version of this conversation you have prepared for is probably the threatening version, and I am not interested in that version. Audrey recalibrated. What version are you interested in? She said. The true one, Soo-Yun said. Tell me what this is. And Audrey Donald, who had been told to not manage it, looked at the woman who held the network's 40-year authority and told her the true version. All of it. From the Tuesday morning to the garden, to the first honest thing, to the piano doorway, and the word us, and the coffee at 7:15 this morning, and what he had said about what she said being supported. Soo-Yun listened. She did not interrupt. She sat with the full, uninterrupted attention of a woman who had decided to hear the whole thing before she produced a response. When Audrey finished, there was silence. Then Soo-Yun said, He told you what you said would be supported. Yes, Audrey said. Before I arrived. Yes. Soo-Yun looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in her expression that was not the network version of her face. Something more private. Something that had to do with 11 years and a son who had been carrying the network since his father's death, and the specific, fundamental difference between a man who is organizing principle and a man who is present. That is the first thing he has decided entirely for himself, she said, since Ji-Tak died. She stood. The conversation was over. She moved to the door. She stopped. I am not your enemy, she said, to Audrey, without turning. The network has enemies. The network's enemies are not mine to allocate. What I am telling you is that what is coming is not from me. She left. Audrey sat in the formal sitting room for a long time, with the specific, full weight of what had just been communicated, not the threatening version, the true one, settling through her. The war was coming, but it was not coming from the mother. The war's true architect was John Rae-won. He had been building toward it for 3 years. Not specifically, not with the knowledge that Audrey Donald would be the occasion, but in the patient, systematic way of a man who had identified a structural opportunity and was waiting for the correct catalyst. The structural opportunity was Suk-jun's refusal to formalize the alliance with the Baek shipping family, which Rae-won had understood, with the pragmatic precision of a man who had spent 12 years as the network's internal strategist, was the consolidation that would shift the balance of the Hwang-jon leadership in the direction he had been building toward. If Suk-jun married Baek Seon-hwa, the Baek family's resources entered the network's expansion possibilities multiplied, and Rae-won's position as the architect of the expansion became the central rather than the peripheral role in the network's leadership. If Suk-jun did not marry Baek Seon-hwa, the Baek family would eventually align elsewhere. The network would miss the consolidation window, and Rae-won's strategic position would remain lateral rather than ascending. The corridor at the music room had been a gift, not one he had arranged, one that had arrived, and which he had assessed in the specific, calculating stillness of a man who understood that the value of information was entirely in the timing of its use. He used it by calling Baek Seon-hwa directly. Not her father, her. This was the strategic choice that revealed Rae-won's understanding of the situation more completely than anything else he did, because calling the father would have produced a formal, institutional response that Suk-jun could have managed at the institutional level. Calling Seon-hwa produced a personal response, which was a different category of pressure entirely. Seon-hwa came to Seoul on the same Thursday as Soo-yun, though they did not come together. She arrived at Cheongdam Hill at 3 p.m. in the specific, composed manner of a woman who had been told something and had decided, before the telling was finished, what she was going to do with the information. She was 35. She had the particular quality of a woman who had grown up understanding that her marriage was a network asset and who had organized her entire understanding of her own value around that understanding, which made the information Rae-won had given her not simply a personal wound but a structural one, a reclassification of what she was worth in the specific accounting system she had been raised to navigate. Audrey answered the door. Binna was occupied with the morning's extended coordination, and the door was in Audrey's rotation, and she opened it with the professional, undemonstrative courtesy she extended to all arrivals. Sianhua looked at her. The specific, complete, assessing look of a woman measuring a person against an expectation and finding the measurement unexpected. She was looking at what had replaced her, or what Ray-1 had told her had replaced her. She was looking for the explanation for 6 years of declined formalization, and she was looking at Audrey Donald in a doorway, and whatever she had prepared herself to find, this was not the exactly as prepared version of it. "I'm here to see Suk-jun," she said. "I'll let him know you've arrived," Audrey said. In the specific, professional neutral of someone who was managing the situation at the level it was currently presenting. She found Suk-jun in the study. She told him. She watched his face go through the sequence. Not surprise, he had been expecting the Beck family since Ray-1 left Wednesday. But the specific, particular expression of a man who had decided something and was now in the first real test of the decision. "Tell her I'll be down in 5 minutes," he said. "Is there anything you need?" she said. He looked at her. The look that had started on a Tuesday morning and had been building ever since. "No," he said. "I have everything I need." The meeting with Sianhua lasted 40 minutes. Audrey did not hear it. She managed the house with the focused, complete attention that was her professional standard, and she stayed at that standard with the specific, adult discipline of a woman who understood that she was not entitled to the contents of that room, and that her presence anywhere near it would have been a violation of the specific, careful territory that she and Suk-jun had built. Sianhua left at 4:40. Her composure was intact. She was a woman who had been raised for these rooms, and she performed them correctly. But she did not look at Audrey when she left. She looked through the door, into the middle distance, with the expression of a woman who has received a definitive answer to a question she has been waiting 6 years to have answered, and who finds the answer both exactly what she feared and different from what she expected. Ray-1 called Suk-jun that evening. Audrey was not in the room. She was in the garden, their garden, with her book, and the evening was the warm spring kind, and she was reading without fully reading because her attention was elsewhere. She heard, from inside the house, the quality of Suk-jun's voice through the open window of the study. Not the words. The tone, the specific, controlled register of a man who is saying difficult things clearly and without heat, which was a different version of control than the managed version, which was the honest one. The call lasted 11 minutes. She counted the minutes without deciding to count them. He came to the garden at 7:15, the same time as the Tuesday morning coffee, which was not accidental. He sat down. He looked at the garden. "Ray-1 has formalized his position," he said. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means the network now has a formal internal disagreement about my decisions," he said. And formal internal disagreements in the network have a specific vocabulary. "War," she said. "War," he confirmed. She held her book. She thought about all of it. The house and the 4 months and the patterns and the 6 months of doorways and the first honest thing and the formal sitting room, and Su-yun saying that is the first thing he has decided entirely for himself since Ji-tak died. "What do you need?" she said. He looked at her. The full, direct, complete version of his attention. "To know that you're not leaving," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not leaving," she said. He exhaled. The specific, releasing breath of a man who has been holding something and has been given permission to put it down. "Good," he said, and took her hand. The first time. The full version, not the garden chair and the almost touch, but the actual claiming of something he had been building toward for 6 months, and held it in the evening garden of the house on Cheongdam Hill with the specific, deliberate certainty of a man who has decided. Ray-1 formalized his position. Suk-jun took Audrey's hand. The network now has a war. Subscribe, because the unpredictable twist in this story is not about the family or the war or the Beck alliance. It's about what Audrey Donald finds in the network's records that changes the shape of everything, including who she actually is in this story. Audrey did not go looking for the records. This is the first and most important clarification she makes in every telling. Because the story shape depends on understanding that what she found was not the product of investigation, but of the specific, improbable coincidence of a Thursday evening, a filing cabinet in the network administrator's office that Binna had asked her to retrieve a household document from, and a folder labeled with a date that was the same as her birthday. She found it in the 6th month, a week after Sukjun took her hand in the garden. 2 days after Raewon's formal position had been communicated through the network in the specific, institutional vocabulary of a man filing a challenge. Binna had asked her to retrieve the household insurance documentation from the administrator's office, the second drawer, the folder marked property operations. She found it. She also found, because the second drawer was organized in chronological order and the household insurance documentation was adjacent to a folder from the same year, a network document that she had not been looking for and which was filed in the specific, administrative shorthand of the Huangjian network, under a name she recognized. Her mother's name. Celestine Donald's name was in a Huangjian network document from 30 years ago, in the Korean language administrative record of a financial transaction that had the specific vocabulary of the network's legitimate operations, a payment, substantial, to a woman in Savannah, Georgia, in the year before Audrey was born. She stood at the filing cabinet for a long time. She took the document. She took it in the specific, careful manner of someone who has found something they need to understand before they know what to do with it. And she went to her staff quarters, and she sat with it, and she looked at it, until the Korean language text became the shape of a question she could not yet answer. She is called Sephora, not to talk, to ask for a translation. Sephora's Korean was native and her discretion was professional, and she came to the staff quarters on a Thursday evening and read the document with the focused, comprehensive attention of a woman who was reading something that required care. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What does it say?" Audrey said. "It says," Sephora said, slowly, with the care of someone who is translating not just language, but weight, that a payment was made to a woman named Celestine Donald in Savannah, Georgia, 30 years ago. A significant payment. She paused. "It's in the category the network used for private welfare arrangements." "What is a private welfare arrangement?" Audrey said. Sephora looked at her. "In the network's vocabulary," she said, "it was the category for financial support provided to individuals who had a specific, protected connection to the network's senior members." She paused. "The senior member listed on this document is Hwang Ji-tak, Sukjun's father." Audrey held this for the specific, suspended moment that the information required. She held it with the complete, adult steadiness of a woman who has encountered something large and is not going to allow the largeness to become more than it is before it is fully understood. "What does the connection mean?" she said. "It could mean several things," Sephora said carefully. "A protected employee. A witness to something the network needed to maintain." She stopped. She looked at Audrey. "There is one other category." Audrey understood before Sephora said it. Not with certainty, with the specific, advancing clarity of someone who has been in a house for 6 months and has absorbed, in the particular way of the attentive, more of its history than was explicitly communicated. "It could be a family welfare arrangement," Sephora said, "which is what the network used for children," Audrey said. "Yes," Sephora said. "The garden, the study, the piano, the hand taken on a Thursday evening. 6 months of a thing that had been building from a Tuesday morning into something she had understood was real and which had just acquired a shape that she did not have a frame for. She is called Sukjun. He answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring when she called, which was itself something she had never analyzed until this moment. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I'm in the study," he said. She went to study. She put the document on the desk. She sat in the chair across from him, the same configuration as the Tuesday morning coffee, and she looked at him with the full, unguarded attention she had been giving him for 6 months. He looked at the document. He read Korean. He was native in it, and he read it with the focused, immediate quality of someone who understood what category of document it was before he had read the full contents. He was still for a very long time. "My father," he said. "Your father," she said. He looked at her. The expression was not the managed version or the honest version or any version she had cataloged. It was the expression of a man encountering something that has reorganized the entire picture, not as revelation, but as the arrival of information that explains things that had the quality of feeling rather than knowledge. He knew your mother, he said. According to this, he financially supported her, she said. Significantly. In the year before I was born. The room was very quiet. Audrey, he said. I know, she said. Do you know what this could mean? I know what it could mean, she said. I need to know if you do. He held the document. He held it with the specific, careful quality of something he was not going to allow himself to process before the processing was accurate. I need to call someone, he said. Someone who was in the network before I was. Who would know the specific record. Call them, she said. I'll wait. She waited in the study, their room, from the beginning, where this had started. She waited while Suk-jun called the person and spoke in Korean in the compressed, controlled manner of someone asking a question they need the true answer to. She waited and looked at the desk where he had made 2 coffees on a Tuesday morning and thought about the specific, remarkable, imponderable way that the universe sometimes arranged the things it arranged. He hung up. He held the phone. He looked at her. The arrangement was for a woman who worked for my father's household, he said, in Seoul, who he arranged transport and settlement for when she returned to America. He paused. Who was, according to the record, carrying a child when she left. Audrey held very still. The record, he said, lists the child's expected birth year. He looked at her. The same year. The same year as me, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about her mother. About Celestine Donald in Savannah, Georgia, who had never discussed Audrey's father with the specificity that the question deserved, who had answered the question when it came with the specific, contained quality of a woman who had decided on a version of the truth she could give and was giving it. She thought about the placement agency that had brought her to Seoul, which she had found through a contact that she had never fully traced and which had placed her, specifically, in the one house in Seoul that contained the answer to the question her mother had never fully answered. She thought about what Sephra had said. I think it is happening to both of you. What does this mean for us, she said. He was quiet for the specific, honest pause. I don't know yet, he said. But I know what it doesn't mean. Tell me, she said. It doesn't mean that what is between us is less real, he said. It means it is more complicated. And complicated is something we have both been living in from the beginning. She looked at him across the desk. The man who had made coffee on a Tuesday morning. The man whose father had known her mother. The man who had taken her hand in the garden and whose family had declared war and who had said what you say is supported before the war arrived at the door. We need to know the full truth, she said. Yes, he said. And then we decide what we do with it, she said. Yes, he said. Together. The full truth arrived in pieces, the way truths with 30-year roots always arrive. Not in a single, clean revelation, but in the gradual, layered assembling of a picture from the fragments that had been kept by different people in different places with different degrees of intention. Hwang Ji-tak had met Celestine Donald when she was 22, working as a domestic employee for a Korean-American family in Atlanta who had connections to the network's American operations. He had been in Atlanta for a business coordination and had met her in the household, and what had developed between them had been, according to the person Suk-jun had called, the one relationship in Hwang Ji-tak's life that the network had never been able to categorize or contain. She had gone back to Savannah when she was 5 months pregnant. He had provided for her, substantially, through the network's welfare arrangement category, and he had done so continuously for the subsequent years, through mechanisms that Celestine had accepted and had not explained to her children, because the explanation would have required telling them a version of their origin that she had decided they did not need to carry. The connection to the placement agency was confirmed when Suk-jun pulled the agency's original registration, which had been established under a name that was a corporate designation for one of the network's subsidiary administrative entities. His father had, in the specific, long-game manner of Hwang Ji-tak, established the conditions that made the meeting possible without arranging the meeting, which was either the most extraordinary coincidence available or the most patient orchestration, in which Audrey would spend considerable time being unable to definitively categorize. What she could categorize was this. Hwang Ji-tak was her biological father. Suk-jun was her half-brother. She held this for the first 24 hours in the specific, full attention way, she held everything important. She held it and examined it from the directions available, and she spoke with Suk-jun with the honest, direct quality that had characterized every significant conversation they had had, and she said the true thing at the precise level of its truth. "We are not what I thought we were," she said. "No," he said. "This changes the shape of what I've been building," she said. "Not its reality. The reality is what it is. But the shape." He looked at her with full attention. "Yes," he said. "The shape changes." "What does it change into?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, into something I have not had. A person who knows the real version of me. Who has been in this house for 6 months, and has seen the managing version and the honest version and the piano version and the garden version, and who," he stopped, assembled the honest sentence. "Who is my family in the truest sense of the word, which I have not been able to say about anyone in this network in 9 years of leading it." She held this. She thought about what family meant in the vocabulary of a man who had led a network rather than been led by it. She thought about loneliness that was not about the absence of people. She thought about the Tuesday morning coffee and the piano and the garden and Soo-yun saying the first thing he has decided entirely for himself. "What do we do about Ray-won?" she said. "Ray-won," Suk-jun said, "has been managing the Beck family communications without authorization, which is a formal breach of network protocol that gives me the structural grounds to remove him from his current position. The document you found also means that the network's legal and estate records require revision, which is a process that Dae-suk will manage, and that Ray-won's position is considerably weaker than he currently understands." "Your mother?" she said. "She called this morning," he said. "She said she had suspected the truth of your origin since the first week you were in the house. She did not say why she suspected it. She said, * she has your father's eyes.'" Audrey was quiet for a moment. "She also said," Suk-jun continued, "that she should have told me about the arrangement years ago, and that she did not because she was not certain what you knew and did not know, and that she chose silence over the risk of error, which was a choice she now understood was the wrong one." "Does she want to see me?" Audrey said. "Yes," he said. "On your terms. When you're ready." She thought about Celestine Donald in Savannah, who she had not called yet, and who she would call today, who had kept 30 years of a complicated truth in the specific, protective manner of a mother who had decided her children did not need the weight of it, and who had, in the particular, unexpected way of things that cannot be entirely contained, arranged for the truth to arrive in a house and soul through the placement agency she had been told was reliable. She thought about reliability. About the specific, structural kind that produced, after 30 years, the correct conditions for a truth to find the people it belonged to. She called Celestine at noon. She told her what she had found. She listened while her mother assembled, over the course of 40 minutes, the version she had been holding for 30 years, the full version, not the managed one, the one that was true. Her mother cried at the end of it. Not from guilt, from the specific, released quality of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been relieved of the carrying. "Are you angry?" Celestine said. Audrey thought about the house on Cheongdam Hill, and the Tuesday morning, and the 6 months, and the truth, and the man sitting across a desk from her, who was her father's son, and who was the most honest person she had been given access to in her life. She thought about the garden and the word us, and the hand taken and the war that had been declared, and the mother who had looked at her in the formal sitting room and said, "I am not your enemy." "No," she said. "I'm not angry." "Audrey, I found a brother," she said. Simply, in the specific, clarifying vocabulary of someone who has processed something enormous and arrived at the true thing. "I found the house my father built. I found a family that was waiting to be known." Her mother was quiet. "The shape changed," Audrey said, "but it changed into something real. That's what the shape was supposed to do." She went to the garden after. Spring has fully arrived now. The garden at the peak of the season that had witnessed the beginning of everything. She sat in her chair. The chair, their chairs, the geography of the beginning. And she held the warm, complicated, entirely real weight of everything the 6 months had produced. Suk-jun came to the garden at 7:15. He was always there at 7:15. He sat. They were quiet in the way they were sometimes quiet, without management, without the performance of comfort, In the specific, full presence of two people who had built something and found, in the building, that what they had built was not what they had started building and was considerably more durable for that. Raewon's formal challenge to Suk-jun's leadership was heard by the network's senior counsel 6 weeks later. Dae-suk, who had reviewed the network's estate records with the methodical thoroughness of a lawyer who had been in these records for 40 years, presented the documentation of Hwang Ji-taek's arrangement and its implications for the network's family record. Raewon's unauthorized management of the Baek family communications was presented as the secondary matter it was actually secondary to. Raewon's position was revised. The war, which had been declared by a man who had understood the network's structural opportunities and had not understood the network's actual senior member, concluded in the way of wars that are declared on incorrect intelligence, not with thunder but with the patient, methodical dismantling of the position that the intelligence had been designed to secure. The Baek family was notified through official channels that Suk-jun's position on the alliance had not changed and would not change. Baek Seonhwa, who had been told the accurate picture by Suk-jun directly in the 40-minute meeting that had been the war's first battle, moved on with the specific, composed dignity of a woman who had been given a clear answer and was not going to spend her future in an unclear question. Soo-yeon came to Cheongdam Hill on a Sunday in June. She came alone, no staff car, no formal configuration, in the specific, private manner of a woman making a personal rather than an institutional visit. She asked for Audrey. She was shown to the garden. She sat in the chair that was Suk-jun's chair when he was in the garden. She looked at Audrey across the small table. "I should have told you in February," she said. "You told me what you could," Audrey said. "I told you what I had decided to tell you," Soo-yeon said. "Which is different." She paused. "Your father would have told you himself, if he had lived long enough to understand how to. He was a man who could build the conditions for a truth to arrive without being able to say the truth directly." "I know," Audrey said. "I've been in his house for 6 months." Something moved in Soo-yeon's face. "Not the network version. The other one. He would have loved you," she said. "He was very good at that. It was the part of him that the network could not contain." Audrey held this. The specific, full weight of a sentence from a woman who had watched her husband love people for 40 years and had been one of them. "Tell me about him," Audrey said. Soo-yeon looked at her for a moment. Then she settled into the garden chair, and she began to talk about Hwang Ji-taek, the full version, the one with 30 years of specific detail, and the complicated warmth of a woman who has known someone completely and is giving that knowing to the person who deserved it from the beginning. Audrey listened. She listened in the specific, full attention way she had always listened, completely, without surplus motion, with the total presence of someone who understood that the thing being given was worth every word of it. This was how the war ended. Not with the network's formal council decision or Raewon's revised position or the Baek family's notification. With a Sunday afternoon in a garden, a woman talking about a man, and a daughter finally learning who her father was. The house on Cheongdam Hill, which had not allowed mistakes, had allowed this. Had allowed the specific, remarkable, patient architecture of a truth that had been 30 years in building to arrive in the only way it could. Through the accumulated weight of 6 months of doorways and morning coffees and garden chairs and honest sentences, and a Tuesday morning that had opened a door that neither of them had planned and both of them had needed. Audrey Donald stayed at 14 Cheongdam Hill. Not as a maid. The position changed in the specific, documented way that such things change when their nature has become something other than their title. What she did there, and what her presence in the network meant for the network structure, was a project she and Suk-jun and Soo-yeon built together over the following year with the specific, patient thoroughness of people who understood that the most important things take the time they take and do not benefit from being rushed. She called her mother every Sunday evening. Not from the staff quarters, from the study, which had always been the room where things started. The calls lasted long. There was a lot to say. She said all of it. Every time. That was, she had decided, the only version that was worth saying. The end. From a Tuesday morning at 7:15 in a second-floor study to a Sunday afternoon in a garden where a mother told a daughter who her father was. Audrey Donald and Suk-jun's story proves that the most important things that happen to people are almost never the things they planned, and almost always the things they were moving toward without knowing it. A placement agency established under a network subsidiary's name. A filing cabinet with a folder from the year she was born. A man who built the conditions for a truth to arrive without being able to say it directly, because some things take 30 years, and a garden and a house that runs at an exacting standard, and a woman who was excellent enough at her function to be given the access that the truth required. The family declared war. The war ended in a garden. The house on Cheongdam Hill did not allow mistakes. This was not a mistake. Hit subscribe for our next story. A woman hired to manage the estate of a man she has never met discovers, on the first day, that every instruction in his will references something she did 14 years ago that she has never told anyone. The attorney calls her at midnight. She has until morning to decide whether to accept the inheritance. The truth it comes with will change every account she has of her own life. See you there? Real talk. When Audrey found the document in the filing cabinet and understood what it might mean, and chose to take it to Suk-jun rather than manage it alone, was that the most important decision in the entire story? A. Yes, because she could have managed it away, could have protected what they had by not looking more closely, and she chose the truth instead. B. No. The most important decision was when she told Soo-yun the truth in the formal sitting room, because that was the decision that turned the potential enemy into the person who eventually sat in the garden and gave her father's seat. Both. One was honesty with him. One was honesty with his family, and the story needed both to arrive where it arrived. D. The most important moment was Suk-jun saying, "What you say is supported," before his mother arrived, because that was the sentence that told Audrey she was not alone in any room that was coming, and that changed everything about how she faced what came. Drop your answer below and tell us, have you ever found out something about your own history that reorganized the entire picture? Did it change who you understood yourself to be, or did it explain something you had always felt without knowing why? Also, Hwang Ji-tak built the placement agency that brought Audrey to Seoul without ever meeting her. Soo-yun said he was good at loving people, and it was the part of him the network could not contain. Do you think he knew what he was building toward? Or do some things arrive correctly without the person building them knowing why they're building them? Sound off in the comments. Because this story is about one thing underneath everything else. The truths that find the people they belong to, even when the people who hold them have decided to protect everyone from them. Sometimes the protection is the delay, and the truth arrives anyway, in a garden, at 7:15, in the house it was always going to find. What do you think?